I think he's very good. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's got great leg locks. But he got a tough matchup in his first fight. Diego Sanchez is a killer. He was fighting at altitude. He had to deal with the jitters. A long plane ride. You're coming from Poland. A lot of things, working against him for the first one. So, we're expecting a super, super tough fight on Sunday night.
How much do you prepare specifically for opponents, and how much is it just preparation? Is just you being you and doing what you do in a fight?
We get super into it. Like, we watch a lot of tape. We break things a lot down. We get into like metrics of like breaking down numbers or stats and what they throw for punches and how often they shoot, how often they do this, and we're pretty big about numbers and crunching that kind of stuff. And we get super specific on opponents as far as like strategy and tactics and tendencies and what we want to do. Some people go out with the mentality like, oh, it's a fight, I'm just gonna fight, and we don't buy into that. We train for very specific things that are gonna happen.
Do you feel like that's kind of played into your longevity as a fighter, that you have been such a student at the game?
I definitely think it helps. We never go into a fight blind. I know some guys will talk about like, oh no, I'm not gonna, I don't care what he does, I'm just gonna fight my fight. And I understand like that's one way to go about it, but I don't think that's the smarter, better way to fight. I think that if you know that you're gonna run a marathon, you should probably run a marathon and work your way up to it.
The fight obviously we're looking forward to on Sunday, but more important things, Joe, the Patriots are playing this weekend.
Yes, that is the priority. So we're gonna weigh in, and I'm gonna be like watching the Patriots game on my phone until I actually step on the scale. Gotta go. But yeah, I'm excited for the game.
Are they the clear favorites, and do you think they're gonna win the Super Bowl this year?
I think they crush everyone. I don't think it's even close. I think it's like a 16-point spread for Saturday. And it's just gonna, they're so dominant. I don't think there's anyone in the league that's even close.
When you compare Marcin Held's like jiu-jitsu style to yours, what do you think like the differences are in the way that you two approach like the game and the submissions?
I think he's very good. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He goes for a lot of leg locks. I used to do a lot of leg lock stuff, but I do it a lot less now because I've gone for a lot of leg locks and I've got punched in the head for my troubles. So I've kind of like worked away from it. He's still at that point where he's still going for a lot of leg locks. So a little bit different, but I think he's kind of at a point where I was, like 10 years ago.
You're fighting on the same card as BJ Penn, certainly, a legend in the sport. What are your thoughts on him and his comeback?
He's the man. I'm so excited to be on the same card as him. I actually requested to be on this card because he was fighting on this card. So I'm excited. It's so great to see him, and I think he's gonna win. I think he's gonna get it done. Everyone's talking about Yair Rodriguez, who's a great fighter, but BJ's the man. I think he's going to get it done.
I remember The Ultimate Fighter Season 5, and you actually kind of raised your hand when they asked who wants to be on BJ's team.
Yep.
Is he part of the reason that you drove yourself to be the competitor you are in the sport?
Part of it, so I was really lucky that I've had really good mentors from the beginning. I had, Joe Pomfret and, my coaches back home when I first started. But then, I got in the UFC, we did well. And then, I was on BJ's team right off the bat. I had great experience, with BJ and Reagan and Tony D'Souza and Rudy Valentino. And then I was fortunate enough to go out to Hawaii and train with all of them and kind of, one of my other coaches always says, stand on the shoulders of giants, and that was what we did. BJ, he was at the top of the sport, and I had, a lot of time, training under him and training with him and learning from him and seeking out advice. And, it's definitely been a huge part of my development and, a cornerstone to all my training.